Have you ever been in a relationship that felt so intense, so full of passion that it consumed you? The connection felt electrifying, almost like you couldn't live without it. Every moment together seemed to pull you deeper, and you began to believe it was love. The kind of love everyone talks about. But as time passed, you realized something wasn't right. The intensity, instead of bringing you closer, was pulling you apart. You were left wondering, if this is love, why do I feel lost, confused, and drained? Before we answer that question, I ask you to perform 3 simple things. Hit that like button and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, and comment one thing that you are grateful for today. Thank you for your support, and let's get back to the video. The truth is, many of us confuse intensity with love. We equate high emotional experiences, constant highs and lows, with deep connection. But intensity is not always love. In fact, it can often be the sign of something else: emotional imbalance, trauma, and unresolved psychological wounds. This intensity may feel like love, but it's not. It is the unconscious attempt to fill a void that was created long before this relationship. The intense emotions that swirl in such relationships aren't an expression of love. They are a response to unresolved issues, often from childhood. When our early emotional needs weren't met, whether it was love, validation, or care, these wounds remain with us. And without realizing it, we seek out relationships that reflect these early dynamics, where the emotional highs and lows feel familiar and even comforting. But these emotional extremes are not the foundation of love. They are the result of something deeper, an emotional need that has never been healed. Carl Jung's work highlights how much of our adult lives are influenced by the unresolved issues we carry from childhood. He proposed that these unresolved childhood experiences often manifest in our adult relationships, pulling us toward partners who reflect these wounds. In many cases, what feels like love is just a reflection of our attempt to heal old emotional scars. It's a search for something we never received as children, the emotional connection, attention, or reassurance that we needed to feel secure and whole. The intensity we feel is a response to this unmet need. It feels real, almost like a dream come true, but it's not based on mutual care or true connection. Instead, it's a reaction to past trauma, an attempt to resolve feelings of abandonment, loneliness, or insecurity that we haven't addressed. This intensity draws us in, making us believe that this is what love should feel like, but it keeps us trapped in cycles of emotional imbalance. In these relationships, we are often projecting our deepest needs onto the other person, hoping they can fill a role that no one else can. We expect them to heal our wounds, soothe our pain, and give us the validation we didn't receive in childhood. But the problem is, no one can fill that void. No one can fix our unresolved emotional needs. True healing comes from self-awareness, understanding our wounds, and learning how to love ourselves, not by relying on someone else to heal us. The emotional intensity may feel intoxicating, but it's a dangerous illusion. It creates a false sense of connection and masks the underlying issues. What we need isn't more emotional chaos, but emotional peace. True love is calm, it's grounded, and it's built on mutual understanding, trust, and respect. It isn't about constantly proving our worth through emotional highs and lows. It's about finding stability, understanding, and emotional balance. In toxic relationships, emotional manipulation often operates behind the scenes, weaving a web of guilt, fear, and confusion. The emotional climate shifts unexpectedly when boundaries are set, and the manipulator swiftly changes tactics to keep control. They may become distant or overly emotional, trying to provoke a sense of guilt in you, or they might suddenly become overly kind and affectionate, pulling you back into their emotional orbit. This tactic is not always obvious at first. It's subtle, almost undetectable, at least until it becomes a pattern. You start to feel responsible for their feelings. If they are upset or distant, you begin to think it's your duty to fix it, to calm the storm. You sacrifice your own emotional well-being to restore balance, but each time you feel less and less like yourself. What began as a genuine attempt to care for the other person turns into an exhausting cycle of emotional labor, with you doing the heavy lifting to maintain the peace. The manipulator's strength lies in their ability to create a dynamic where your emotions become secondary to theirs. They understand that by keeping you emotionally off balance, they can maintain control. Every time you react to their emotional state, whether by apologizing for something that isn't your fault or sacrificing your needs to meet theirs, you reinforce their dominance. Your natural empathy becomes a tool for them to use to keep you engaged, and they subtly shift the power dynamics, making you feel as though you owe them something. Carl Jung's work sheds light on how emotional manipulation can stem from deep, unresolved issues within both parties. When we haven't dealt with our own emotional wounds, we project these unresolved feelings onto our partners, unconsciously using them to fill a void or to fix something inside ourselves. In toxic relationships, one person often does this more blatantly, using the other as a means to cope with their own emotional struggles, while the other person gets caught in the cycle of trying to manage these emotions. Manipulators are skilled at keeping you tethered to their emotional world, convincing you that their pain is your responsibility to solve. And over time, this dynamic shifts. You no longer feel like you're in an equal relationship. Instead, you're constantly working to manage someone else's emotions, ignoring your own in the process. The longer you stay in this cycle, the more you lose touch with your own sense of self. In many toxic relationships, a subtle but powerful dynamic takes place: the need to fix the other person. This isn't always done with malice, but often out of an unconscious desire to heal past wounds or to make ourselves feel needed. However, the impulse to fix someone else often stems from deeper issues within us, issues we have not resolved from our own pasts. This tendency is rooted in projection, the act of placing our own unresolved pain or needs onto another person, as though they are responsible for healing it. Projection occurs when we unconsciously transfer our own emotional wounds or unmet needs onto the people we are closest to. It might look like trying to fix someone who exhibits the same pain or struggles that we once experienced in our own lives. We see something in them that reminds us of our own brokenness, and we think that if we can just help them heal, it will somehow make us feel whole again. This projection often feels like an intense desire to help, to nurture, or to guide the other person through their struggles. But it's not about them. It's about our own desire to resolve our internal conflicts through someone else. Carl Jung's work provides insight into this dynamic. He believed that the projection of our inner conflicts is an inevitable part of human relationships. We project our unconscious desires, fears, and needs onto others, and in doing so, we seek to resolve parts of ourselves that we haven't fully integrated. However, this process of projection rarely leads to true healing. Instead, it creates a cycle of dependency, where one person is constantly looking to the other for validation, understanding, or emotional relief. In the context of toxic relationships, the desire to fix the other person can be incredibly damaging. You begin to see the other person as a project, someone who needs your help to become better, to become whole. You may even convince yourself that if you just love them enough, if you help them work through their issues, everything will be okay. But this is a trap. What you're really doing is placing the burden of your emotional fulfillment onto another person, expecting them to carry the weight of your unresolved pain. At first, this feels like love. It feels noble to help someone you care about. But over time, it turns into emotional labor. You find yourself constantly giving, trying to fix what isn't yours to fix. You may even begin to lose yourself in the process. Your identity becomes wrapped up in their needs, and your own desires, emotions, and boundaries are pushed aside. The relationship becomes a one-sided effort to save the other person, with your emotional needs taking a backseat. This desire to fix is not an act of love. It is an unconscious act of self-projection. You are not helping the other person because you see them as they truly are. You are helping them because you believe that healing them will heal something within yourself. This cycle is exhausting, and it often leaves both parties feeling unfulfilled. The one being fixed feels inadequate, as if they can never measure up to your expectations. Meanwhile, the person doing the fixing feels drained, as though they are giving more than they have to offer. The deeper you sink into a relationship that demands everything from you, the more you begin to disappear. Slowly, you stop being the person you once were, and the essence of who you are fades into the background, overshadowed by the needs, moods, and desires of someone else. You start adapting, adjusting, and molding yourself to fit the other person's world, believing this is what love requires. But with every compromise, you lose a piece of yourself. At first, these changes seem small. You skip a few things you enjoy to make the other person happy, or you give up time with your friends or family to keep the peace. It doesn't seem like a big deal. But over time, you realize that the sacrifices have become the foundation of your existence. Who you are, what you stand for, your own desires, all of them have been buried beneath the constant pressure to meet the other person's expectations. You've molded yourself into a version that fits the relationship, but the cost is your own identity. What happens when you no longer know where you end and the relationship begins? You find yourself in a situation where you don't recognize who you are anymore. The things you once loved, the passions, the dreams, get put on hold, and suddenly, your life is defined by the needs of someone else. Your emotions become tangled in theirs, and without realizing it, you've become a shadow of who you once were. The person you've become is not an authentic reflection of yourself. It's a version of you that exists to keep the relationship stable, to satisfy the other person's needs. This gradual erosion of your identity isn't always obvious. It's a creeping feeling that comes over time. The loss of self happens when you stop listening to your own voice, stop pursuing your own goals, and instead, live in constant reaction to someone else's emotional state. You become a caretaker, a fixer, a pleaser, and everything you do revolves around maintaining the other person's happiness. The problem is that the more you focus on them, the further you drift from your true self. Eventually, the question arises, who are you if not someone's partner, someone's emotional caretaker, or someone's source of validation? The answer becomes elusive because you've given so much of yourself to the relationship that it's hard to find the pieces of you that were once whole. This is the dangerous trap of losing yourself in a relationship. You forget what it feels like to stand on your own, to make decisions based on your own needs and desires, not someone else's. In this state of emotional dependence, your sense of self becomes fragile. You start to wonder if you even exist outside of the relationship, outside of the role you've taken on. You've sacrificed your own wants, needs, and individuality in an attempt to please someone else, and now you struggle to find the person you once were. What you once saw as love is now a trap that has consumed the very essence of who you are. The weight of guilt in a toxic relationship is often subtle, yet it can feel like a constant pressure on your chest. It creeps in quietly at first, perhaps in the form of a passing comment or an emotionally charged look, but over time, it grows until it becomes a constant companion. You begin to feel guilty for wanting space, for taking time for yourself, for even thinking about your own needs. The idea that prioritizing yourself over the relationship is selfish starts to take root in your mind, until eventually, it feels impossible to assert your own autonomy without feeling like you're doing something wrong. Guilt becomes a tool of control, a way to bind you to the other person's emotional needs while suppressing your own. The more you give in to this guilt, the more you lose your sense of self. You start to question your own actions, wondering if wanting your own space or saying no to something is a betrayal. You may even convince yourself that you're not allowed to take care of your own needs because doing so would hurt the other person or make you appear selfish. This is the tricky part of emotional manipulation. It convinces you that your needs are secondary, that your desires are secondary, and that maintaining the other person's emotional stability is your primary job. When guilt is used this way, it doesn't just manipulate your actions, it manipulates your self-worth. You begin to believe that the only way you can be good or loving is by constantly sacrificing your own well-being for the other person's comfort. You believe that saying no is an act of rejection, and that meeting your own needs is a form of neglect. But in reality, this kind of thinking is what strips you of your autonomy. You become less and less of yourself and more of a caretaker, always living with the fear of disappointing or upsetting the other person. Every time you give in to guilt, you reinforce the idea that their needs are more important than your own, that their happiness relies on you, and that you must continuously give, even at the cost of your own peace. True autonomy means recognizing that your needs, your space, and your emotions are valid, not secondary to someone else's. Guilt has no place in healthy love. It's a manipulation tool disguised as care. Guilt is not an indication of love or responsibility. It is the sound of your boundaries being crossed, your voice being silenced, and your worth being diminished. You are allowed to exist as your own person, separate from anyone else's expectations. Choosing autonomy is not about rejecting the other person or being cold. It's about learning that you deserve to take up space, that your emotional well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. It's about giving yourself permission to prioritize your needs without feeling guilty or apologetic for it. When you start to reclaim your autonomy, guilt will lose its grip on you. It will feel uncomfortable at first, like you're going against something deeply ingrained. But in time, you'll realize that the only way to maintain a healthy relationship, whether with yourself or with others, is through mutual respect for each person's individuality. No one should ever feel guilty for prioritizing their own peace, their own growth, or their own happiness. When it comes to toxic relationships, it's easy to find yourself feeling like you're carrying more than your share of the emotional load. You may start to feel like it's your job to manage not only your own emotions, but also the emotions of the other person. You might find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, doing everything you can to keep the peace, and feeling like it's your responsibility to smooth over every argument, calm every storm, and soothe every fear. But this emotional burden is a dangerous one, and it's one that erodes your sense of self. When you begin to feel responsible for the other person's emotional state, you lose sight of your own needs. You start to believe that their happiness, or lack thereof, is directly tied to you, and that it's your job to make sure they are emotionally stable, at ease, or satisfied. Over time, this creates a deep sense of exhaustion, because no matter how much you give, no matter how many sacrifices you make, it will never be enough. The other person may constantly demand more, leaving you emotionally drained and, ultimately, feeling like you're responsible for their well-being. This dynamic reinforces the belief that you are there to serve their emotional needs, while your own are pushed aside. You feel guilty if you don't constantly provide support or comfort, and you begin to see yourself not as an individual, but as an emotional caretaker. You may even believe that if they're upset, you've done something wrong, or that it's your fault that things aren't going well. This emotional responsibility you take on is not love. It's a burden, and it's unsustainable. In these situations, it becomes clear that the lines between your emotions and theirs begin to blur. You start to lose track of where their emotions end and yours begin. Every time they cry, lash out, or pull away, you absorb their pain, thinking that it's your duty to help them work through it. But the truth is, no one should bear the emotional weight of someone else's well-being to that extent. You can be supportive, you can be loving, but you cannot take responsibility for another person's emotional state. The need to constantly manage someone else's emotions comes from a place of insecurity and fear. It's the fear of being seen as neglectful, uncaring, or unloving. But the reality is that the more you take on someone else's emotional burden, the less room there is for your own growth, your own feelings, and your own life. You end up losing the ability to take care of yourself because you're too busy trying to fix someone else. This imbalance can lead to resentment, frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. True love in a relationship involves two individuals who are responsible for their own emotional worlds. You are not here to fix the other person, nor are they here to fix you. Emotional responsibility in a healthy relationship means that both people are accountable for their own feelings, and they support each other in growth and understanding, but never at the cost of their own sense of self. If you find yourself shouldering the emotional weight of another person, it's time to set boundaries. Your feelings, your peace of mind, and your emotional well-being are just as important as anyone else's. You are not responsible for their happiness, and you cannot heal them by sacrificing your own sense of self. In a healthy relationship, both people share the load, but they also understand that their emotional happiness and health are theirs to manage. When you stop taking on the emotional responsibility for someone else's feelings, you free yourself to focus on your own growth, your own peace, and ultimately, your own happiness. Patterns have a way of creeping into our lives, often without us even realizing it. We can find ourselves stuck in the same emotional cycles, replaying the same dramas over and over, even when we vow we'll never let it happen again. No matter how much we try to break free, we end up attracted to the same kinds of dynamics. Emotions that feel strangely familiar, even if they're painful. The truth is, this compulsion to repeat old patterns is rooted deep within us, often tied to our early experiences and unresolved emotional wounds. The cycle begins when we unconsciously seek out situations that mirror past experiences, especially those from childhood. If we grew up in an environment filled with emotional conflict or inconsistency, we may find ourselves drawn to relationships that echo those same dynamics, even though we consciously want something different. It's as if we're trying to recreate the past in hopes that this time we'll finally get it right. That this time, we'll heal the wounds we never had the chance to heal before. But this compulsion isn't about love or finding the right person. It's about familiarity. Our unconscious mind craves what feels known, even if it's damaging. We are wired to seek patterns that we've experienced before because they are comfortable, even if they cause pain. This compulsion is not about finding happiness or resolution. It's about repeating the emotional stories we've known for years, hoping that somehow, this time, we'll achieve a different outcome. The idea of breaking free from these cycles can seem daunting because it requires us to confront the very things we've been avoiding. The unresolved pain, the unmet needs, and the emotional scars we carry. The patterns we repeat are often not consciously chosen, but we tend to recreate them because we haven't fully addressed the core issues within ourselves. We think we are looking for love, connection, or peace, but what we're really searching for is a resolution to the unresolved feelings of the past. When we finally realize we are repeating these patterns, it can feel like a heavy burden. The recognition that we are stuck in an emotional loop can be both painful and empowering. It's painful because it forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding, the parts that have been influenced by past trauma. But it's empowering because it offers us the opportunity to break free. Once we acknowledge these patterns, we gain the ability to change our course, to choose healthier, more fulfilling connections, and to stop repeating the same mistakes over and over. Breaking free from the compulsion to repeat is not easy. It requires self-awareness, deep introspection, and a willingness to do the emotional work of healing. It means choosing to break the patterns and to create new emotional stories that are not dictated by the past. And it means understanding that we are not doomed to repeat what we've always known. Instead, we have the power to rewrite the narrative of our lives. There's a quiet terror that settles in when you think about walking away from someone or something that has held so much of your emotional energy. Even if you know that staying is draining, even if you feel the weight of every sacrifice you've made for the sake of keeping things together, the thought of leaving can still be overwhelming. This fear isn't just about ending a relationship. It's about confronting the possibility of facing life alone, without the emotional crutch you've come to rely on. The fear of leaving is deeply tied to identity. When we invest so much of ourselves in a relationship or situation, our sense of self becomes intertwined with it. The thought of walking away doesn't just signify the end of a connection. It feels like the loss of a part of ourselves. Who are we without this relationship? What happens to the version of us that we have built around the other person? The longer you stay in a situation, the more difficult it becomes to imagine life without it. The emotional dependency on another person often distorts the truth, making it seem like leaving is not an option, that you are somehow incomplete without them. This emotional attachment often grows from the fear of being alone, of facing the discomfort of solitude. In a world that often equates companionship with validation, walking away can feel like admitting defeat. It's not just the fear of the other person being upset or angry. It's the fear of confronting your own vulnerability, of acknowledging that you don't need the emotional connection to survive, that your worth isn't tied to someone else's approval. But the truth is, staying out of fear of being alone only perpetuates the cycle of emotional dependency. The longer you stay, the more you lose your ability to be independent, to know yourself outside of the relationship. The more you hold on, the more you convince yourself that being in this emotionally charged space is your only option. But this fear is an illusion, one that convinces you that leaving means you will lose your place in the world, that your worth is somehow diminished without this relationship. Leaving is not about abandoning someone else. It's about reclaiming your own autonomy, your own emotional freedom. It's about choosing to stand alone, even if that means confronting the discomfort of uncertainty. The fear of leaving fades when you realize that in leaving, you don't lose yourself, you find yourself again. You create space to rediscover who you are, to heal from the emotional wounds that have kept you stuck, and to rebuild your identity in a way that's not defined by someone else's needs or expectations. The act of leaving, though difficult, can be the most empowering choice you make. It is an assertion of your own worth, a recognition that you are deserving of peace, of respect, and of a relationship where both parties contribute equally to each other's well-being. It is the beginning of healing, the first step in breaking free from the emotional ties that have kept you tethered to a cycle of fear and dependency. Now, my beautiful viewer, if this message has sparked something in you, feel free to like and subscribe and comment. I am successful if you have reached this far into the video. Thank you and hope to see you in the next video. Salute.